acknowledging, and there we go. There's the recording. Perfect. Thank you, Jeffrey. I'd like to start by recognizing and acknowledging the Kakite First Nation, as well as all Coast Salish people on whose traditional and unceded territories I live, learn, work, and play. So I want to give a huge thank you to our speakers for joining us today to talk about this very important conversation. I was just doing an interview this morning, and the person talking to me said, "So are we done yet? Like, are people feeling like we're done yet?" And I think that's a very common refrain that's going on right now. So today's conversation is about mental health. Taking care of your mental health at the end of the year comes the continuum of care that's in British Columbia. I recognize that this topic might be challenging for some people, and if you need to talk to someone, just a reminder that frontline staff and volunteers are available all across the province in your communities, and you can call them at 310-6789 anytime, 24 hours a day. So 310-6789. So I'd like to start by introducing today's speakers. We have a wonderful lineup today. So first is Asha. Asha is the director of the Interior Crisis Line Network, and she's also the interim program manager for the Crisis Line Association of BC. Committed to resilient communities and empowering services, Asha has over 25 years of experience establishing large-scale social service programs, including a national peer support program for cancer survivors and their families, and the 310 mental health line for BC. The last 15 years have been dedicated to supporting generally accessible, evidence-based, and responsive crisis line services in BC. Welcome, Asha. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Johnny. So Johnny is the noteworthy leader of the Canadian Mental Health Association BC division. He previously worked in public service at the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions, where he played a key role in helping to build the new ministry from the ground up, eventually leading the policy and legislation branch as senior director. Johnny has a long research and practice history in suicide prevention and has trained as a counselor. Welcome, Johnny. Next, we have Ivana. So Ivana is here. She's a volunteer crisis service responder at the Crisis Centre of BC. Ivana has been with the Crisis Intervention and Suicide Prevention Centre in Vancouver since 2019, having joined looking to help others after experiencing mental health struggles of her own. Day to day, she works in technology, and when not volunteering, can usually be found long distance running, relaxing on the couch with her dog, or searching for a coffee. Welcome, Ivana. Thank you all for joining us today. So I'm going to kick things off with some questions now. So Johnny, what makes this time of year so challenging for people's mental health? And how is it different this year compared to previous years?
Well, first, it's fantastic to be here and to have so many people listening in on this conversation. This kind of conversation helps push back stigma in so many ways, and so it's a great opportunity to be here. I think I remember this when I was a crisis line volunteer. I started my career 25 years ago as a crisis line volunteer. And I remember taking calls at this particular time of year. I'd always sign up for a night shift at the crisis line. And I think this time of year, whether you celebrate the holidays that are in and around this time of year or not, it's the end of the calendar year. It's a time that's often associated with people being together. And a lot of the pressures and stresses with this time of year, whether it be buying things, purchasing things, gathering things, cooking for people, and those pieces. But I think we're at a particular punctuation mark. And if I think about what's happening in the world right now, what's happening close to home right now too, there's a lot that's impacting our mental health, and whether that be the ongoing impacts of the pandemic and the uncertainty that's associated with that, and whether we can or whether we can't be with people this holiday. I think, you know, there's a significant recovery underway right now, of course, related to floods and climate change related events that feel out of our control, but of course impact how we're doing. And of course, I think many of us are deeply saddened and concerned and wanting more action, of course, in the area of the ongoing drug poisoning crisis here in BC. So there's a lot at play. And we've collected a lot of data this past year, and recently about over half of Canadians are saying that they're feeling anxiety, depression, isolation during the holiday season. And the end of year can make that feel a bit worse or more intense for people who are experiencing some of those symptoms, Pamela.
Thanks so much, Johnny. Sorry, just as an aside, as someone pointed out in the chat that we didn't introduce Jeffrey. So my apologies, Jeffrey. So Jeffrey is, he's been working behind the scenes to make this webinar possible and is coordinating the technology. He's our tech support today. So welcome, Jeffrey, from the Crisis Line Network. So Johnny, we touched on it a little bit, but there's this idea of the continuum of care in BC. Can you explain what that means exactly?
Yeah, maybe, and before I take that question, one thing I might say is one could argue that all of the things that we've experienced lately have thrown mental health and substance use more firmly into a spotlight. And I think many of us who are on this call, have been parts of efforts over the years to destigmatize these kinds of conversations and make it okay to talk about mental health. We all have mental health, and we're all having this, a set of experiences. And in many ways, what's happening in the world around us is kind of thrust mental ill health into a way where more and more people are talking about it at the very least, and hopefully relating on it. It's also, I think, shone a very bright light on this notion of the services that are available here in BC. And I think it's really important to recognize that there has been, I think, greater attention upon making more and more services available. We provide services, my colleagues here at the Crisis Line Network provide essential services. And I think many on the line here who are listening in would say, well, what do you mean by a continuum? I experience a lot of discontinuum or disconnection. But I think the ideal of what we all want to continue creating together is the idea of being able to ask once to get help fast, being able to get the right care at the right time, being able to prevent problems from developing in the very first place. And that involves, big, bold thinking, like how to prevent homelessness, how to prevent trauma and those pieces, all the way through to thinking about where our services as agencies in community or in the health system begin and end. For example, you might place a call to one of the crisis lines in the BC Crisis Line Network who provide 24/7 service. And from there, you might bridge into a referral to a transition house in community, or a family services agency, or a neighborhood house. Or you might walk into a CMHA branch in BC and say that you want to access employment services. We offer a lot of employment services through the branch network, and be connected to someone who can help with work if you're living with a mental illness. So there are a lot of things available in BC, and there's lots and lots of community agencies who make up the fabric of care in so many profound ways, providing closer to home, community-based mental health care, often on shoestring budgets, trying to make ends meet to provide services to people experiencing vulnerability, distress, in need of support, and a listening ear. So this today is an example of a partnership that we've been strengthening and cementing over the past few weeks about the incredible role that the Crisis Line Network, of which 3 CMHAs are part of it, and also ourselves, in trying to provide as much of this fabric of care to people in community, whether you live in a rural location or in an urban center, to really provide this continuum of support. We have a ways to get there so that people don't hit a door that's closed or locked or get lost in the system. There's absolutely significant work to do there. But I'd say crisis lines and CMHA do play an important role in helping people avoid locked doors when it comes to accessing support.
Thank you, Johnny. You talked about there being a listening ear and the important role that the crisis lines play. And Asha, I wonder if you could expand on what services the crisis lines offer for British Columbians.
Sure, thank you, Pamela, and thank you, Johnny, for that wonderful description of the continuum, because absolutely the crisis lines across BC provide support right across the continuum. And we often say that we're the invisible safety net. So where that service that is under every single social worker when they're putting an outgoing message, or a doctor's office, the ER departments when they're discharging people, where that invisible safety net that tries to catch people, support, be, as you said, that listening ear, definitely using our skills around risk assessment, safety assessment, crisis de-escalation. We are not a revolving door into 911. We are very much focused on working with the individual, collaborating with them around what are their strengths in this moment, what are their needs, how have they dealt with this in the past. We look at it through a sphere, or what we call sort of spheres of support. So we start with the individual. What are their strengths that they're bringing to bear as they're dealing with this crisis? Because we absolutely receive calls from people across the continuum, whether you're just having a bad day or your worst day, we're here for you. So, and we begin with looking at what are their strengths, and then, what are their other supports, whether it be family, friends, etc. And then community supports, like the tremendous work that Johnny and the CMHAs across BC do, and all of our other community partners. So we're really looking to work with that individual to assess safety, to de-escalate, to guide them to the right resource. And sometimes that might be a self-care plan. So we often are working collaboratively to develop that with the individual. Sometimes it is a safety plan. And in 0.5% of calls that we are unable to de-escalate, it will be a call into 911, but it's definitely working with the individual and strengthening them and ensuring that they get the right response. So they do tremendous work, and it's either 24/7 over the phone, and some of our partner crisis lines within the network also provide support via chat or text. And I can put some information in the chats where you can go to the website and find your local crisis line. But definitely people tend to think of us for crisis, and yet crisis is determined by the individual. So sometimes it might be someone's having a really tough day and they just need someone else to talk to, who's not going to tell them, well, what you should do is blah, blah, blah. But then for others, they may need some real safety assessments and deeper support. So it is definitely right across the continuum for sure.
Thanks, Asha. I had someone say to me recently that they didn't want to call the crisis line because they didn't want to be taking a spot away from someone, or they were hesitant. They didn't think it was an emergency. Could you maybe talk about what kinds of calls you tend to get this time of year, and why do people call, and how can you help?
Certainly. First of all, that's heartbreaking to think that someone would not call because they don't want to take a spot away from someone. We have over 720 crisis line responders across the province. There are people with varied skills that are committed to taking the call and expressing this is how they give back. This is how they want to care. So I would hope that no one would ever self-edit calling in. And you're absolutely correct. We get a wide range of calls, particularly around this time. As Johnny was saying, there can be a heightened sense of isolation. Though the holiday season can create a sense of safety and a bit of buffer, we sometimes will receive fewer calls around this time, but they can be more escalated and longer calls. So we definitely are receiving calls from people feeling isolated, feeling overwhelmed. They may be struggling with healthy boundaries with family members, which I think we've all experienced at some point over a holiday meal, or they may be reaching out to us to self-manage their mental health. They're trying to deal with their anxiety in a healthier, safer way, or they may be feeling a depth of isolation and a depth of just a sense of hopelessness or helplessness, and are considering sadly sort of permanent solutions to temporary emotions. So we're there right across, and And definitely we do see a wide range. I will also share, we do get a lot of people calling for information, and that's often because people feel safer to ask for information than they do to ask for support. So even when someone's asking for information, we're still engaging safety assessment, we're still asking questions, we're still touching base with them, because we know that in our culture, it can feel safer to ask a question rather than saying, I'm hurting today and I need to talk to someone. So absolutely, we get the whole gamut for sure.
Thanks, Asha. And so when you do call the crisis line, one of the people that answers the phone sometimes is Ivana. So thank you, Ivana. Ivana is one of the volunteers in the BC Crisis Line Network, just doing phenomenal work. And Ivana, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what your experience is like volunteering with the crisis line.
Excuse me. Yeah, sure. So it's really rewarding. Like people ask me this pretty often, and they said, how was your shift? How was it? And everything. And it's hard to describe because it is really rewarding work. You get to help people on some of the worst days of their lives and be the person who helps get them through that in whatever way they need, which is incredible. But you also learn from that a great deal about how to conduct yourself with the people in your life and how to help them and how to be a better presence for them. It can sometimes be frustrating because you don't always get the resolution that you as a helper might want or hope for, and you have to learn to be okay with that, because it's not about you or satisfying your desire to help this person. It's about satisfying their need. Excuse me. So it's stressful for sure, because you are listening to people who are struggling and you have to build your own coping mechanisms to deal with that. But it's a huge learning experience overall. And it's always wonderful when you help someone through something and they say, thanks for being here. Whatever that crisis or distress or need was, it's always great to have used your training in a way that helps them get through a really terrible moment. So
yeah. I so admire and respect the work that you do. Really appreciate it. What kind of training do you get to prepare as a volunteer to work on the crisis line?
Sure. So the training is really comprehensive. So a lot of the training is around breaking down whatever expectations we might have. So what do you bring to this? What expectations do you have? And getting us all to a place, because we do the training in groups. So getting us all to a place where we really understand the purpose of the center, where we understand the purpose of ourselves as volunteers and as listeners, and then from scratch, learning that both the continuum of care and the structure under which we are meant to provide support. And then you learn like an entirely new vocabulary sometimes to help people, because as Asha mentioned, like quite often our impulse, especially when someone that we care about comes to us with a problem, is to be like, oh, hey, have you thought of this? Have you done this? What have you done? So a lot of the training is about pausing that and taking a moment to learn the vocabulary that will help this person express their distress in a way that is comfortable for them, while you can also do an assessment of what's going on. So that is a huge part of the training, just learning how to be quiet for people, learning the distinction between asking a question that will help the person as opposed to asking a question that will help your own curiosity, for example. So you have to pause, like, is this a question that I'm asking because I want a better picture of the situation, or am I asking a question because it will help me help this person? So there's a lot of checking yourself and making sure that everything that you say is in service of the person in distress. So that's a good deal of the training. We do a lot of practice. We do like role playing as an example. So yeah, and technical things in terms of managing, like, if we need to call 911, if we need to do all sorts of things with the phones, we get training in that as well to make sure that the experience is smooth for the caller.
Great. Thanks, Ivana.
No problem.
So Asha, Ivana's just one person on the other end of the line. Who is typically on the other end of the phone when someone calls crisis line?
Sure, that's a great question. As I shared, we currently have 720 crisis line responders across the province, and they do come from all walks of life, from all perspectives. There's a common commitment, though, in that they tend to be the carers. So they tend to be the carers in their families, they're the carers with their friends, with their work, etc. And so many of the people that come forward to be crisis line responders either have already worked in the helping profession, they may be a first responder, they may be, ambulance, social workers, etc., or they might be leaning and going into that role next, and that this is a training space for them. This is a space for them to translate this compassionate heart that they have with the skills that are shared in over 100 hours of evidence-based, internationally recognized training that each one receives, to translate that in a way that is confidential, that is genuinely accessible, which we know is so important because we can accidentally bruise when we are trying to support, that is research-based and is genuinely empowering. So as Ivana was saying, that when someone that we care for comes to us in our personal life, we often want to fix, whereas these crisis line responders are trained differently. And so they come from a huge variety of perspectives, but there is that genuine caring. There's usually a connection to mental health and mental wellness. And there is a desire to be in the helping profession, whether they're coming out of it now and want to give back, or they're heading into it. So it really is a supportive environment for people in that, with that unique perspective, because it really takes sort of this really unique, beautiful human being who says, I want to answer the call, knowing that this could be life-saving, life-changing for someone, and not everyone is in a place to say yes to that. So they're extraordinary heroes in my mind, the crisis line responders across the province.
Wonderful, thank you so much, Asha. Johnny, what other sort of less immediate supports are available for British Columbians?
Because you've trained me so well in how to respond to media, I'm just going to respond to my own question and then go to your question in a second, Pamela. I was just so struck listening to both Ivana and Asha describe the kind of the unique, the very intimate, the caring, the compassionate, empathic space that's made in this very profound context of a crisis line call. And it's great to see at least two folks in the chat who've immediately said, you know, how do you become a first line crisis responder? It's lovely that this talk is precipitating interest, because crisis lines also provide this kind of service, but also beyond that call, you've got all of these mobilized, caring professionals. I mean, I first took a call, I still remember my first call, and those skills that I learned, much like Ivana was describing, serve me every day as the CEO of a large mental health organization. That those skills are invaluable. And I just think of all of the mobilized, caring, those caring hearts that Asha was describing that are out there in the world that have all benefited from crisis line training, and all of the difference that they make beyond that call is so critical. So I just wanted to just say about, you took me back in history with your story there. So thanks so much. I feel like I'm in good crisis line company here. There are other resources, and so often our partners in the crisis line network refer to these resources. So one of the resources where we've seen huge uptake is a service that we've operated since 2008 with our branch partners, and that's called Bounce Back. And it's not therapy and counseling, but it is human-powered coaching support around folks who are experiencing worry, stress, low mood, depression, and anxiety. It's a profound program. We've got folks around the province, and it's a level of support that is different to what you'd experience in a crisis line encounter. It's an ongoing coaching relationship, and it's completely free. It's completely free. And folks can look at Bounce Back, and they can refer themselves into the program, or they can talk with a GP or a nurse practitioner or someone to get referred into Bounce Back. Over 2,500 doctors in this province refer into the Bounce Back program, and huge thanks to Jeffrey for popping the link into the chat. What that program does, it won't solve some of the bigger systemic issues that we've been talking about, but I do believe it does give folks some room to maneuver in their lives around how to interact with how you think, how you feel, and how you behave, particularly in the times that we're seeing. And we've seen a double-digit increase in the number of people accessing the Bounce Back service. A couple of other things I'll just flag for you. We've been very concerned and worried, of course, about a whole range of professions and work in the workplace, but particularly healthcare workers. And very early on in the pandemic, we were asked to stand up a service in partnership with the CMHA Vernon Crisis Line called Care to Speak and Care for Caregivers. And this service is really designed to support long-term care workers and also community health aides or home care aid workers who may not have access to mental health supports as part of their employment. And so folks, of course, could call into a crisis line, but could also access this service where you can experience peer support. And so we have a service that has volunteers who are peer supporters delivered through a crisis line model. So we chose to go with CMHA Vernon because they know how to operate the kind of care that you've heard Asha and Ivana describe with great skill in the interior. So it's a free service, a service of volunteers who have direct experience of being in healthcare, providing peer support. Again, a distinct kind of service, different from a crisis line encounter, but we've definitely seen a growing number of healthcare workers call into this peer service who might then get referred back into the crisis line. And that's part of the model. Like, there should be no wrong door to care. And 310-6789, which is a number you've seen Jeffrey populate in the chat, 310-6789, such a crucial number for people to circle back to receive, ongoing care and support. The other thing I'll just describe here in response to your big question, Pamela, is we're so excited by the work of CMHA North and West Vancouver. And they've just launched a unique peer-assisted care team and community, which we hope will become a very key extension or part of the crisis line world in Vancouver. Folks have probably seen lots of media coverage and what have you about how do we reduce our reliance upon police as the default de facto responder in a mental health crisis. And to hear Asha's statistic of just how much diversion crisis lines do to help people not need to access an emergency response like the police is also profound. So we have some real momentum here to really, of course, work in partnership with first responder communities like the police, but really pivot ourselves so that we have much more of a health response for health emergencies like a mental health emergency. A suicidal crisis can absolutely be framed as a health emergency. And the question that I'm often sitting with is, well, why don't we send more of a health response to that kind of emergency? And so the branch there has launched this service in North Vancouver called Peer Assisted Care Team. And it's a team staffed with civilians, so peers, so people with lived experience of mental illness or substance use problems, with experience of the system of care, alongside mental health professionals, social workers, counselors. And they go out and they've responded to a significant number of calls since they were launched. They are restricted to that area. So I know we're on a provincial call today. They are restricted to that area of North Vancouver, West Van, North Van, and the city of North Van. But they're responding to people in profound ways. And we see such an opportunity there to integrate with the incredible work of the distress centers on the Lower Mainland going forward. We're exploring this work in the city of New West and the city of Victoria as well. So there's lots. You can check out cmha.bc.ca to learn more about all of these pieces. And I think the key message I'd end my comments with is we at CMHA cannot do this alone. And I don't think the crisis lines can do it alone. We have to do this together. We have to stitch the fabric, we have such a moral imperative to get more care to people and also deal with the structural stuff that generates distress in the first place. Like arguably it's incredibly difficult to maintain one's mental health if you're precariously housed or have lost your home or are without a home. So that's where we do have to double down our efforts too. But and that's a big part of our systemic provincial advocacy in pushing for change in all of those areas too. Pamela, did I start to answer your great question?
Yes, you did. Thank you so much, Johnny. And Jeffrey and I have popped a few links into the chat to connect to some of those services that Johnny mentioned. So thank you so much, Johnny. Ivana, you know, as this conversation is going on, I'm thinking a lot about the variety and types of calls that you get. And I'm wondering what skills you've gained through training and through your experience. What skills have you gained to answer crisis calls? And I know you touched on this a little bit, but if there's anything else you wanted to add.
Sure. Yeah. So I did mention, I think, talking about emotions. So you learn that new vocabulary for vocalizing how other people might feel. You learn to speak to them in a way that doesn't parrot or echo what they said, but to make them feel heard. You learn how to do that, and that's really powerful because you can take that to any part of your life. And that's what being a supportive listener is at its foundation. It's just showing someone, hey, I've heard you. Like I have understood what you are saying, and I can offer you an insight based on that. I can move this conversation forward in a productive way. There's that. You do also learn useful things like boundaries. So like we are there to help, but we're not there to be counselors. We're not there to provide advice. We're not there to we have a very defined role, and we stick to that role even when sometimes we may want to provide advice or something like that, but that's not what we do. And or even when the caller explicitly asks for it, like people will ask, what should I do? And that's not my place to provide that. I have no context for the life beyond that call. I can't do that. So learning that and learning how to set boundaries around ourselves. Sometimes folks may ask about us personally, because they want to have a conversation, they feel connected to us, but we can't really do that. The call isn't about me, the call is about them. So we learn to set those boundaries. And again, that's something you can take into the rest of your life as well. And you learn a great deal of conviction, I think, because in these calls, quite often you have to make a choice based on your training. You have to make a choice in structuring that call, or in calling 911 if you need to, or in being very clear with the caller that, hey, look, I'm here to collaborate with you. That's my role. Like, how can we do that together? So you have to make these very uncomfortable sometimes decisions that are in service of someone else, even if they don't necessarily believe that. So yeah, you learn a lot of those skills in high pressure situations, which also is really translatable. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Healthy boundaries, so important for everyone. Good listening skills, so important and valuable no matter what you're doing in your life, right? And conviction is really powerful. So thank you so much for that, Ivana. Johnny, what do you think is needed to ensure that British Columbians have access to the care they need, like particularly in these winter months?
So we've been saying throughout the pandemic a few things. The first thing I say is encouraging people to reach out, and there's a caveat to that, because I recognize countless people have reached out in different ways and may not have found the help that they're seeking. That's why the Crisis Line Network is so key in helping do some of that navigation and connection. We've also really encouraged people to reach in. And really to think through ways in which we can connect with people we might be worried about, and simply just to see how they're doing. Reaching in was so critical in my own life. I have lived with depression since my early 20s, almost didn't make it through university. And it was a caring person who reached into me that helped connect me to care 20 plus years ago. That was the 3 to 4 directory shift that I needed to really get the care I needed access the supports I needed. And you know, you can all see clearly how important mental health is to me because of the organization I work for. And so, you know, reaching in and those, I would not underestimate the power of a conversation. Like Asha and Ivana have talked about conversations, and so many of the conversations that happen at a crisis line are at the very least life-changing conversations, and sometimes life-saving conversations. And for me, ultimately, the conversation I had was both life-changing and life-saving. And so, you know, really, if there's someone in your life that you haven't spoken to for a while, maybe it's a neighbor or a colleague, we're all atomized, many of us anyways, are at home without those natural linkages into our communities because of what's happening with the ongoing pandemic. We are fearful of course, with good reason, being close to each other, being socially connected, and that comes with peril and risk. And so, you know, thinking through who you might reach out to and connect with. And Ivana's given us a good coaching on some of those skills, listening with curiosity, not listening to advise, asking, you know, a good question. How are you doing? I'm worried about you. I'm here to listen, are good entry points. And these are the very skills I learned many years ago as a crisis line volunteer. So we need to reach in and we need to reach out. And really important to find ways to support community organizations who are leading this work forward. I mean, think of your crisis line in your community, whether that be the Vancouver line or in the interior, in the north, CMHA. There are branches across this province who've been working hard to keep folks employed, housed, fed, nurtured, connected, within communities of care. And there are many agencies. I see PCRS is on the call today. They do brilliant work throughout the community around mental health. So thinking about how you might support community agencies and organizations who are doing this work, whether it be through volunteering. I think we've got at least 2 potential new crisis line volunteers out of today. Donating to a community agency, whether it be your crisis line, a CMHA, another nonprofit, the United Way, volunteer, donate, join a board, and help lead community mental health going forward. I would also, all those things I think are good for mental health. And I would say that there is systems change underway. I think we can sit in a place of thinking that the system is completely broken and completely fragmented. And in many ways, the moral imperative to build a functional, fit for purpose mental health and substance use system is a ways away. It's a ways away in so many jurisdictions, but we do have absolute urgency in this province because in October we lost 201 lives. In BC, 500 people die by suicide each year. So we do have urgency here, but there is change underway. And I think about all of the work that the crisis lines are doing. And also I think about the number of agencies that are currently delivering low cost or free community counseling. And we'll pop a link into the chat there. There have been profound efforts, I think, to make sure that we can get care to the right people at the right time. And I am appreciative of all of the recent investments that we've seen come from the province to make some of this work possible. The province absolutely can invest much more, and we hope they do. And they have invested recently in some significant ways that I think is worth calling out and underscoring, community counseling grants being one of them that we'll flag in the chat. So there's lots there. And I think seeing a number of constituency assistants on the line, I'm also want to think through ways how we can support CAs with their own mental health, because they provide so much support. Maybe there's a crisis line training there for CAs that's in the offing, but just to make sure that you let your elected officials know just how important mental health and well-being is, particularly at this punctuation mark in time and history. Pamela, back to you.
That's great. Thank you, Johnny. I want to just go to a question that came up in the chat, because you talked about your own experience and having that life-saving conversation. And Sonia's asking, when reaching in, what did that life-saving conversation look like for Johnny? And what approach made the big difference that you needed at that point?
Well, so many of the things that Ivana described, I remember this person pulling me to one side, and he did not pathologize, right? He did not say, I think you're depressed right now, Johnny. Let's get you to the emergency department. He demonstrated human connection and presence. So I felt safe. Like, I did know him, and he was someone I'd known for some time. So he demonstrated, I think, connection. He demonstrated empathy. He did things that signaled to me that he got. He understood. He had a sense of what I was experiencing at the time, and he was very deliberate in his follow through and his questions. So he listened to understand. He did not listen to diagnose. He did not listen to dismiss. He did not listen to judge. He listened, and I think listening skills are underrated with their value. They're not underrated by crisis lines, because that's the heartbeat of a crisis line, is listening. And so I think the more that we can do, particularly in the current world that we live in, where there is so much polarity, there is so much division, there is so much isolation and disconnection. I think Asha's comments were very on point, is if there's anything that we can do, whether you're a crisis line volunteer or not, to listen, to understand, to listen, to be with, to listen, to connect. Ultimately, that was what was life-saving for me, is having someone listen to me. So listening is so important. And I think the more that we can either learn how to be a better listener or practice it ourselves, I think, the better that we will be in tackling some of the issues that we've covered in this call today, Pamela.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Johnny. Thanks for sharing your story. One final question over to Asha for the last one. What can British Columbians do to help themselves? And when's the right time to reach out for help?
That's a great question, Pamela, and I really enjoyed this conversation, just hearing everyone sharing. As something that comes to mind just when Johnny was speaking around, there's such a rise in need right now. And often there's this gap between need and resources. And I know the commitment of the crisis line responders is often stretches to bridge that gap. What I tell my team all the time, and certainly happy to share with this group, because it sounds like there's lots of people in the caring fields on the call now, it's not a time to be demoralized when need outweighs resources. That gap is actually a call for us to invest in collaboration and innovation. If we truly had enough resources to have one social worker per one person, then maybe we would be in a great place. But we're light years away from there. So until then, this gap is actually an invitation for us to get involved. It's an invitation, as Johnny was saying, to listen. It's an invitation to express that care in a way, to guide people to resources. So if there is something that British Columbians can do, it's to not lose heart because of the gap, but be willing to enter into that gap, to be willing to enter into that space and say, I may not be a social worker, I may not be this, but I care and I'm here to listen, like to ask the question, how are you? And then actually pause long enough and create that space to hear the response. And part of that is also to, as Johnny was saying, to reach in, to tend ourselves, to recognize when we may need to talk to someone, when we need to reach out for support, and to recognize that there are an incredible host of potential resources. Johnny shared quite a few here that I've only just recently been learning about myself. So there's things that are happening with CMHA, with crisis lines, with mental health and addictions around the province. So reach out, ask what's available in your community. So you can certainly do that through a crisis line. Reach out, have genuine conversations. Something that we notice is that people don't get burnt out on the crisis line from supporting people. We get tired if we feel we're not making a difference. So really tap in on a daily basis as to how you are making a difference. Whether you are bagging groceries and you're actually just communicating and talking to someone, or you're considering volunteering, or you're going to be a peer support person with the CMHA, there's a way that we each can, as I often say, sort of bring our thread to the weaving. We often look at this need as so much bigger than this one thin thread we have, but if we all just bring it, we can weave that safety net together. So definitely reaching out for support, offering support where you can. I know that there's a fantastic sort of 5 tips that were developed with CMHA, and I think there's a link there as well that have some tangible things. One last highlight that I would share is I often say, as Johnny was saying, that just listening makes a difference. And brain scans show that it does. When we feel heard, it actually lowers adrenaline and cortisol. Like it literally opens the mind. It allows us to function. So another thing that can do that is gratitude. So even simple acts of gratitude literally change the biochemistry and helps us function better. So if there's a way that you can incorporate what I call vitamin G, sort of a mental health vitamin of gratitude, even if it's just thinking of 5 things you're grateful for each day, it starts to help rewire the brain from looking to the negative, which is what's kept us alive as a species, to looking at things differently. So those are just some things. And if at any point you need to be heard, then definitely reach out to the crisis line, because if it's not us, we can guide you to the right CMHA or the right program and get you where you need to be. So thank you.
Thank you. My dose of vitamin G for the day is going to be expressing gratitude to all of you for being here today. I so appreciate you taking time out. Ivana, Johnny, Asha, thank you for sharing your experience and your expertise and your wisdom with all of us. Really appreciate it. Jeffrey, thank you for staying on top of the chat and making sure we're all good to go. Appreciate all of your awesome partnership and organization. Just a reminder of a couple of things. Crisis line number 310-6789, all across BC. No area code needed for that. You can also visit cmha.bc.ca for a list of resources, support, articles, or you can visit your local CMHA branch as well, again, all across the province. Thank you all so much for being here, and have a lovely rest of your day, and get some vitamin G, as Asha said. I like that. Thank you.